Well, Tom, let me play devil's advocate for a minute here. You've been talking about WJR's ratings slipping, and the whole idea, of course, that Long may have taken the blame just to bail out Schembechler to maintain sort of client relationship. But WJR's whole program format, it hasn't changed much in the last 15 or 20 years. It's a fairly dated format, probably with a fairly old demographic group. Mm-hmm. Baseball as a whole has been slipping. It does not draw the young viewers that it once did. It was once, you know, every boyhood dreamed to go out and play baseball. Well, now they're playing soccer and they're playing basketball, and you know, one could argue that baseball is no longer America's national pastime. They're talking about a new stadium. They're talking about leaving the city, going out into the suburbs, maybe having some of the success that, for example, the Pistons have had in recent years by changing the perception of the Tigers, the perception of the game. Isn't it perfectly reasonable, if you're going to do something radical like a new stadium, which is obviously every bit as wrenching an emotional change as changing a radio personality, isn't it a reasonable thing to say, you know, it's a new era, it's a new market, we have to do it differently, the old ways aren't working, and Ernie Harwell, God bless him, maybe, but for Paul Harvey, the only guy in radio that's had the same job for 30 years. You know, broadcasting is a very rapid turnaround kind of business, and hey, you've had a good run, Ernie, but now it's time to move on. What's wrong with that? Well,
you used the term reasonable. And I don't think there's anything wrong with identifying flaws in maybe the way you're doing business right now, especially because this is a business. Mm-hmm. But it's a business predicated on making and providing something, in this case entertainment. Sports is not just sports. Mm-hmm. They're not just sports anymore. It's entertainment as well as sport. But the reasonability factor, which is what judges use in the courtroom and what people use in trying to deal with other people, was not a factor in this particular situation, I don't think.
Well, no, in broadcasting, to be given a year's warning that you're going to lose your job. I mean, I used to work in radio. I mean, it used to be if you were getting bounced, you came into work that morning, when you were done with your air shift, they'd call you into the front office, they'd say, friend, you're canned, pack up your stuff and get out.
Yep, absolutely.
And maybe we'll give you 30 days severance pay, mm-hmm. but we don't want you back on the air once you've been told you're out. And to give a broadcaster, as a broadcaster, a year's warning after employing him for 31 years, that seems awfully generous in terms of the industry.
But in this situation, Ernie Harwell, first broadcaster voted into the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Ernie Harwell, who has been the voice of the Tigers and who has been a representative of WJR and the Tigers, if nothing other than figuratively for these 30-plus years, has, in the eyes of most, earned a little bit more respect. Now, you would have thought that the Tigers, along the way, would have treated this professional in a professional way, and they did for the most part. You would have thought WJR would have, and they did for the most part. But Ernie Harwell and Paul Carey, the last 18 years, and Ernie Harwell before that with his other partners, has been the only baseball announcer who's had to do with their own engineering. All the other stations for years have provided engineers, have made the job of the announcers just that, so that they can prepare for games, they can do things in a professional manner. But these guys have been lugging heavy equipment for years, when, especially now that Ernie's advancing in age a little bit, you should be doing things to help him do his job better. And the Tigers, WJR hasn't done that. That reasonability factor hasn't taken place.
Could that be a case where simply Ernie, being a gentleman, as I'm told he is, was not going to go into a negotiation session and say, hey, I want a 20% raise and I want an engineer? Could it be that that's the way they always did it, so that's the way they always did it?
Ernie, from what I've gathered, Ernie was disappointed for years that when he and his partner would walk into a radio booth and carry their equipment up, that he would see other first, second, third year guys from Minnesota or Kansas City or wherever, assistants that were carrying this equipment in. Mm-hmm. And the respect factor that they had in a short time mm-hmm. was something that I think Ernie maybe was a little disappointed that he hadn't earned in his lifetime of working for stations.
But could he never have asked for it?
I'm sure that they asked. I mean, I'm not going to say that Ernie definitely asked, but I'm sure in some way, shape, or form, Ernie did ask politely and was turned down. But the reasonability factor that we come back to, I just don't think that if someone in any industry, I don't think that radio or television should be any different. And I'm more of an idealist than maybe someone that's more pragmatic with something like this. But I don't think anybody that's put in 30 or 31 years whose level of performance has been not called into question, whose demeanor and the way in which he has represented the company has diminished, should be let go. If they're still able to do the job, I don't care how old they are. And that issue is not, age has not come up, but I would not be surprised if age is a factor, because they've talked about the demographics and how the demographics for listenership is smaller, and that they need to reach more people of a younger age if they feel that Ernie can't get to them. And I think that's a mistake. I really think that that's a mistake. Young people, I don't think young people today are going to automatically turn on a radio because there's a younger announcer on there. Mm-hmm. If anything, I think that the bridge, especially in sports, the bridge of a young listener to a station of some kind can be made through a father or a grandfather. And I just think that it was an unreasonable thing to do in the way in which they dismissed Ernie. How many more years is Ernie Harwell going to want to broadcast? In my mind, and from what I've been able to find out in the few opportunities in the last year that I've had a chance to speak with, in fact, last year at spring training covering the Tigers, I asked how, Ernie, boy, you sure look good, and you just seem to still have a lot of enthusiasm. How long do you want to keep doing this? You and the wife going to go and retire somewhere and enjoy retirement? He said, well, Tom, I enjoy doing this, and I think I'm still doing a good job, and I don't know, probably a couple more years, but I'm just going to take it a year at a time. Now, why couldn't the Tigers have said, Ernie, sat down with them, and they've got a new contract they're signing with the Tigers, and why couldn't they have said, hey, Ernie, we're curious, how much longer do you want to keep doing the games? We aren't asking to chase you out. We're just curious. Or do you have retirement plans? And I think they could have gone about this in a much better way. They might have found out. Ernie would have said, "Well, I don't know if I want to do it for the full 5 years that the station has a contract, but I think a couple more years would be fun." And that might have been it. But from what I've gathered, it wasn't. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any of that. It was cut and dried. Ernie, we don't want you back.
Yeah. We're going to go to couple of announcements now, and when we come back, we're going to go out and get reaction by some students over at University of Michigan and see what some of the young people you're talking about, what they thought about the firing of Ernie Harwell. So we'll be back with Hometown Magazine after these messages.